Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Solar for Schools Cuppa Club. While we are waiting for everyone to join, we thought we would show you a fantastic new video. So enjoy.
It's already quite polluted, and if we don't save the planet, it will become wrecked. So we have to stand up for our rights and try and do as much as possible.
Sometimes I feel like, what if we do destroy this planet? We only have one. But then I can always make myself feel better that we are all doing little things.
Solar for Schools helps schools get solar panels. It helps schools get low-cost solar energy at zero capital cost to the schools. Our goal is just to help as many schools across the UK get solar as we can, and that's why we're here. Today we're here at Spinfield Primary School in Marlow, Buckinghamshire.
Welcome to Spinfield Primary School.
We were looking at a potential threefold increase in electricity prices. I knew that we had to do something.
Solar for Schools were absolutely fantastic to work with. They guided us along each step of the journey.
They could do all of the project management that was required, get all of the permissions that are required from the council, from the district network operator. It would have been great if we'd been able to raise the money ourselves, but realistically we weren't able to do that in a small school with only 210 pupils with limited income and limited reserves. Solar for Schools and the Community Benefit Society was a way of raising the money.
We just felt so supported by Solar for Schools and had every confidence in what they were going to do.
The idea of being able to use solar panels within schools was a really nice, bright new initiative and made a lot of sense to the school and to the parents who supported it.
So we were really excited for the panels to come in.
Solar panels were installed July 2022 in the heat wave.
Kieran came along with his team. They were absolutely fantastic to work with, worked really safely, really carefully, and engaged with the children really well. So the children were very excited about the solar panels coming in.
Spinfield Primary has saved a lot of money since getting solar panels. One of the great things about Solar for Schools is that not only do we put panels on school rooftops, we also provide education in energy and sustainability. That's for the lifetime of the solar systems. We go into the schools and deliver workshops and assemblies.
Some people came in and taught us about the solar panels and then the climate and made us understand it more why we were installing the solar panels.
Today I'm delivering an assembly at Spinfield. I'm going to be showing them some of the live data that we share with schools that have installations with us.
Of course, the children, they are so enthusiastic. Projects like this, they just love.
I really enjoyed making the solar panel circuits.
I've learned that solar panels can take the energy from the sun and use it to help the school.
It saves burning fossil fuels. And now we're using solar panels, it's even better.
I've taught my mum and dad about solar panels and my grandparents. And I think it will hopefully help them to understand why it's such a big achievement for us and what they can do to the world.
So we're hoping to run between 30 and 45 minutes. It's an opportunity for all participants to get to know the leadership team, to learn about their mission and the role of the wider community as Solar for Schools works to decarbonise one school at a time. And Danielle and Robert will explain why now and why it's urgent. It's an opportunity also for all of you to ask questions. Please use the chat box to do so, and we'll respond to them as we go along. Right, just before they introduce themselves, this current offer, similar to previous offers, would fund the installation of solar panels on UK schools. If you look at the offer document, between 8 and 11 schools, roughly 1 megawatt, depending obviously on how much is raised. There is a triple aim of saving money for the schools, cutting carbon emissions, and stimulating sustainability education and awareness for students. In this specific bond, Solar for Schools CBS are targeting £800,000 with an interest rate of 5.5%. Investments in the bond are eligible to be held within an IF ISA. I should note that this offer is phase 3 of a programme which is aimed to raise up to 4 million. Right, enough of me. If Robert, Anne and Danielle could introduce themselves, perhaps Robert, you could kick off the big picture. What stimulated you to start this business? What are the founding principles and differentiating features?
Thank you, Joanne. What stimulated me to start this business? So previous to Solar for Schools, I worked for a venture capital fund investing in early stage businesses, and they were developing technologies to help the world decarbonize. And whilst most of those technologies did ultimately work, a lot of those companies failed, mainly because no one was adopting those technologies. Now, we also need a bit more time to develop some of the technologies that don't yet work in order to decarbonize completely. So at the time, I thought we need to do something with the technologies that do work to accelerate or to buy us some time. And putting solar on schools was a pretty sort of obvious place to do it. Schools consume electricity mainly during the day. They're very stable counterparties. Schools rarely close, unlike most businesses and businesses that last 25 years are rare. Most schools will be around for 25 years or more. And so that was one reason. But the really interesting reason about, or the why I find schools so exciting and what's so special about schools is the opportunity to empower young people. Young people are pretty scared about the future. They hear about climate change, they can start to see it around them, but they're powerless or feel powerless to do very much about it. And one of the most incredible things that I discovered on this sort of journey was for a neighbor. And at this point, Danielle and Anne can probably fall asleep because they've heard it a few times before. And go make yourself a cup of tea if you heard it from me before too. But a neighbor who worked for an insurance company, money no object, building a house, was bragging about how he's getting around environmental legislation to not put solar panels and a heat pump in his house. And so I worked with him on the different arguments. I went through the sort of financial arguments as to why it made economic sense. I talked to him about the social and the climate arguments, and I couldn't persuade him. And I sort of went home very depressed, thinking, crumbs, if I can't persuade a peer, an intelligent person with enough money to do the right things, what hope do we have as a planet? We're doomed. And I was telling this to my wife, and my daughter heard me. My daughter is a good friend of his daughter, so she went around to talk to his daughter, and the two of them tackled him. And they can't tell me, and I wish they could tell me exactly what they said to him. All I know is that a week later, he called me and he changed his mind. And this is key because when we go into schools and we talk to students and we explain about energy, the question we're often asked is, but what can I do? I'm just a 12-year-old. What difference can I make to the world? And we go, actually, you can make a huge difference. Did you get what you wanted for Christmas? And they go, yes, what's that got to do with anything? So, well, your parents care very deeply about your happiness. They want you to be happy. They want you to have a good future. So you need to learn what it is that they need to do differently to ensure that you do have a good future. So we then talk to them about and explain to them what energy is. And Danielle will tell you a little bit more about what we do in the schools. And we explain to them that if they understand the problems and the challenges and solutions, they can then educate their parents and their community about doing that. And then they go, but I'm just one kid. And I go, yeah, but there are 2 billion young people in the world out of the total of 8. So that means you each have to only persuade 3 adults, 2 parents and a grandparent. Could you do that? And they go, yes. And so that's the incredible power. If we can then educate children to do and understand the challenges we face, we can accelerate the pace to net zero. Now, why aren't governments doing this, and why are we having to try and fund this? Partly inertia, and partly most governments around the world can barely afford to teach children basic literacy and maths. Slightly different in the UK, of course. So if you want to do this on a global basis, we have to find some way to fund it. And the solar panels are the perfect way to do that. So we can use the solar panels, which provide a reasonable return on investment, to fund that decarbonization education in the schools, not just for 1 or 2 years, but for the lifetime of those projects. And that's what's so special about Solar for Schools, is it enables us to harness the sun to deliver decarbonization education to students on a sustainable way, rather than rely on charities and donations to do it for 1 or 2 years. So that's kind of the why of Solar for Schools.
Thanks, Robert. We could move on to you, Anne. And if you could focus on the education piece, why is that central to what you're trying to achieve? And could you try and describe that in terms of impact?
Thank you, Jerome, and yeah, thank you, Robert. So as you may have already gathered, the reason that Solar for Schools exists isn't because we have a particular love of solar panels. It's very much a community that is all about engaging with schools. The video at the start, which I hope you sort of take some time out to look at on the ethics platform, when you hear it, you'll hear that it's all about a school in Spinfield. It's a school called Spinfield in Buckinghamshire. And it was very, very fortunate because it had some amazing supporters at the school who were able to raise quite a lot of grant actually locally, which helped offset some of the capital that we raised through the Community Benefit Society. And as a result of that, they've been able to really benefit financially from having the solar panels. But the educational workshops are the absolute amazing thing about Solar for Schools, because they really bring high levels of engagement. And Danielle, in particular, she's in the schools and she can share with us, some of her experiences. And what's really lovely about Solar for Schools is we work with other grant providers who are particularly keen to work in areas of deprivation across the country. And that ensures equal opportunities for all students, because our educational system is quite divided if we look across the country. And we can see, as a company going into schools in the south and north, in rural areas and also in inner cities, that there is a disparity between a child's experiences from coming out of a rural school, perhaps, to a child coming out of an inner city school. But Solar for Schools delivers workshops to all the schools at the same standard. And we're able to raise that knowledge and understanding that Robert was talking about for every child that we meet. So every child that Solar for Schools meets will have an equal opportunity to gain knowledge and understanding about how to live more sustainably. And that will absolutely transform them as they move forward to become responsible citizens in their own right. So I think for us, the education package is so important to us. And I'm going to pass on to Danielle, or back to Jerome, should I say, to introduce Danielle, because she has those real experiences.
Yeah, I think we'll pass it straight on to Danielle, because she was central to that video. She is central to that and really brings it to life, all the aspects of it, even the installation process, which really brings the kids into the whole concept. Anyway, over to you, Danielle.
Classic, I was on mute. Thank you, Jerome. So yeah, just to kind of extend what Anne was saying, the majority of our schools are primary schools. We have many secondary schools, but a lot of our schools are primary schools, and we reach typically about 200 students per visit. And that is through assemblies and workshops, like Anne said, and we're covering learning objectives that are incredibly powerful, like what is a kilowatt hour, and how much energy does the solar panel system on their rooftop generate, and how can students conceptualize that so they have a real understanding by the time we've left the school of how much energy the average household uses, for example, how much that costs, what a kilowatt hour is, and then how much capacity is on their rooftop for generating electricity. And it's really exciting for the students. I always leave them with the idea that they've got a power station on their rooftop, and that's really empowering. I try to drum up a sense of pride in that, because it is an incredibly powerful tool that they have there. And as Robert said, they often do go back to their parents and talk to them about this excitedly, and of course it isn't possible for parents. Most parents in this country cannot afford solar panels, but we're inspiring them with the idea of energy efficiency. So something else we cover is by showing students the live school data that they have access to and talking them through that and showing them that they can suddenly see how much electricity their school uses in comparison to how much solar is generated by their system. The children are blown away by it. And I remember one student fondly from a school called Roundhay St John's, which after the workshop session, she came up to me in the playground. She asked me, so like how much are solar panels then? Because I want my parents to get them. And I was like, oh, okay, so hang on a minute. So wait there. Perhaps don't go home and go and badger your parents to get solar panels. They're still really expensive. And this is the way that we've supported the school to get solar panels. But one thing you can do is perhaps you can think about how other schools in your local area could get solar panels, right? That's something that you can achieve. You could ask to talk to your head teacher about that. And she said to me, I'm going to become a head teacher and I'm going to make sure that we've got solar panels. And that's it. That's what we want. In the video about Spinfield, what stands out to me is an ex-student who spoke in that video. I'm not sure if you saw it in that one. I didn't catch it, but her name was Poppy, and she came back to the school to tell us about her experience of being part of that solar panel project. And she was so proud. She was so proud to have been a part of it. And just the sense of, and what I got in the whole, in not every school has the entire community as part of the project, right? Spinfield was a special case in that way, and we'd love every school to have that capacity to do that, but it isn't possible for every school, but Spinfield did. And the sense that I got there was across the board, across every student, was this sense of civic action, that they were actually taking some action. They'd even come up with the idea of having power down days. So after the solar was installed, they thought, right, we need to continue to reduce our energy uses. How can we do that? And they were so thrilled to tell me in their assembly about this power down day. So one day of the school year, they completely turn off all their electricity and cope without it. And I just think that's amazing. And they've come up with that as a result of doing this project. I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Danielle. In terms of questions, if we could step back, so this investment, or impact investment, if you like, is about the duality of impact, which you guys have highlighted really well in the offer document and in this webinar, but there's also the financial aspect, and that's where I'd like to turn to Agata or Agata. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. This question, who as a potential investor needs to hear how this will generate a return on investment over the term of the bonds. Could you cover this, please? And obviously you've got a financial track record. So could we look at that, and could we consider the next few years, certainly the term, the duration of this bond?
Agata, thanks for asking that question. It's, as you say, the critical piece behind it all. So I think there's two parts to it. One is that ultimately the money to repay the bonds and pay the interest is coming from the sale of electricity from those solar panels. Most of that electricity is sold back to the school, but of course the school is closed on weekends and summer, so some of it invariably spills back into the grid. And we have a model that predicts how much of a certain system size in a certain location, based on how much that school consumes generally, will be used by the school versus how much is spilt back. And knowing that, we can then calculate what the school would have to pay for every unit it buys from us, so that the sum of the units sold to the school plus the sum of the units sold to the grid at a relatively low price, we assume 3.5p for what we sell back to the grid, is enough to repay the investors over a 23-year period of time, to repay that loan, over a 23-year period of time, and the interest over that time, and any maintenance costs and management costs around it. And those management costs are the bits that we then use to then fund the education piece. So that's the key mechanics of it. The key variability of it are, how much electricity will those solar panels generate in the first place? And that's actually pretty easy to work out. There are databases that tell you how much electricity you'll generate from a solar panel in a particular direction or orientation anywhere in the country. We take that data, we adjust it downwards a bit to be conservative. So that's the first bit. How much the school will consume of that, that's the second piece. And then what's the cost of installing it? So those are the three factors. And we've now done nearly 200 projects. So we've got a pretty good experience as to know what that costs. And that's all in a financial model that's actually visible indirectly on our website. So any one of you can go along to our website, and there's a little search box on the bottom right, so it's sort of bouncing up and down school. If you click on that and you look up your school, you can follow through the steps. It's probably not as easy as it could be. Some students manage to do it with a little bit of guidance, and they develop their own little project, and we help them with that. But you can look up what any school in the country would have to pay for solar electricity using that model. So that's how the money flows.
I was going to say, Robert, I don't know if this is any help, but we also ensure for the bondholders that they will see their return on investment, because we monitor our systems. We have eyes on our systems all the time, and that means that we can ensure that those systems are going to generate according to the model, that they are going to produce the yields that we're expecting, and then very unusually for a community benefit society, Robert and team have developed a way of monitoring all the financials as well. So we look at both yields and financials to ensure that our bondholders, who are very much part of our community, will see their return on their investments. So I just wanted to add that bit in, if I may.
Thank you. Add a supplement to Agata's question. I mean, it's obviously well known that over the last couple of years, energy prices have been extremely volatile. How do you deal with that? And how do you manage for volatility?
So one of the things we want to avoid is that the calculator might, for small primary in the north of the country, might come back and say this school would have to pay 23p per unit for the economics to work, so we could pay bondholders back in due course. The problem is that school might be paying 21p and therefore is not going to sign an agreement at higher than that. And this is where working two things. One, trying to attract funds at a relatively low cost. 5.5% is, in the current market, it's still quite expensive. I mean, interest costs are one of the highest costs of the total model. So if we could raise money at less than that, we could help more schools. But it's a balance between being able to raise enough money to do some schools at an attractive rate versus doing all schools. But back to the point I was trying to get to, which was there are situations where the price that we could offer a school is just too high for that school. They won't do it. If we could get lower cost money, we could then help that school. And one of the ways we do that is by trying to attract grants. So we're incredibly lucky that the National Grid approached us last year, and they wanted to donate 20 small systems. And we persuaded them that that's actually a bad idea, because it creates A, a bad habit, and B, they don't look after the system. So we know lots of schools that have come to us and say, we want solar panels. They've already got solar panels, they just didn't know they had them, and they weren't working. So donating a system per se is not a great idea if you don't look after it. So the deal with it with the National Grid was that they would contribute and top up pots of projects. And that means that their 2.5 million over the next 5 years will actually cover many more schools, particularly in deprived areas, that allow us to combine a little bit of their grant with bondholders and eventually bank loans to offer a PPA that's low enough that it'll be below what they're currently paying. Now, at the moment, the threshold we've set internally is we don't want to contractually enter into an agreement with any school at a price above 19p. Most of them are paying 21 to 23 or 30, but we think electricity prices will come down to about 19.5, and therefore we don't recommend that they enter into an agreement above that price to protect both the school from ever being in a situation where they have to pay the CBS more than they're paying for mains, and avoid the situation where they might then try and not pay and therefore cause a problem to bondholders.
And just staying on the financial sustainability, if you like, of your model, Tim is asking and has noticed correctly that the payback period in the financial model is 23 years. This bond is expected to be redeemed in 5 years. How will you deal with that? So how are you structured financially to deal with that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So there are two ways of doing it. One could offer a debenture that gradually repays every bondholder over a 23-year period. The challenge with that is that you're repaying lots and lots of people a little bit of money every year for a very long period of time, which is not very attractive to most investors. So that's why we said, well, what we'll do is we'll hold your money for 5 years and then repay it completely. How do we actually do that? We do that by raising bonds again. So the underlying mortgages, if you think of the mortgage as the sort of repayment of the system, is gradually shrinking over 23 years. After a 5-year period, we've effectively repaid part of it. Typically, we reinvest in other projects, but effectively that's equivalent of repaying it and raising more money. And then the rest, we refinance. So we're about to repay about £1 million worth of bonds due this October. And so we've just notified them all that they're due for repayment and given them the option to reinvest automatically at 5.5. About half we think will want to reinvest and half will then be repaid. And that will then be raised from new bondholders coming in who want to invest for a 5-year period. Now, there's of course a risk that we might end up in a situation where no new bondholder wants to put money in at 5.5%, and then we're stuck with not being able to repay those bondholders immediately at that due date. So in the documentation, we state what happens in that situation, and that is that basically we then switch to the long-term repayment and repay them gradually over time. What in reality would happen is that some people would want to be repaid all their money quite quickly because they need it, because they're buying a house or whatever, so they would get prioritized. And others would be quite happy waiting for 10 or 15 years, earning the interest on the full amount. In addition to that, and maybe before I go to in addition to that, so that's the biggest risk, and we're quite open about that in our documentation. The biggest risk is there is a risk that we can't refinance after 5 years, and your money might then be stuck there for longer, but we would then repay it over time, and it wouldn't be spread out. You just repay them in order of urgency. Now, to avoid that risk further and reduce that risk further, we've been working with Triodos Bank for the last 6 months to lend money to the CBS. And they will lend us up to about 50% of the total loans in the CBS pot. And that means that when we have to repay certain bondholders, effectively the bank can step in and replace those bondholders. So that gives us an additional means to provide liquidity at the 5-year mark. So I think that hopefully that covers that point. There's one or two things that we're also doing, like looking to offer something called legacy shares, which are inheritance tax efficient ways of investing, and those wouldn't be repaid after 5 years. They would be repaid a year or so after that person passes away, and then that would then be passed on to their estate tax-free, and that also then reduces the sort of pressure on the sort of 5-year mark. I hope that answers that question, but by all means ask an additional one if I haven't covered it.
Thanks, Robert. And that's obviously something that the investment team at FX has discussed with you and challenged you about, and we're all very sort of happy and content that that great plans are in place. Just switching gear a little bit, just turning to Michael's question, can solar be combined with other tech, battery, EV charge points for greater returns?
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing the questions. We're looking at batteries and other technologies. So what definitely works is heat pumps help, because that increases the consumption of electricity on the one hand, but reduces their consumption of gas. It's not a perfect marriage because of the fact that we generate most of the power in the summer and a heat pump needs most of its power in the winter. but it helps over the autumn and and spring periods. Electric vehicle charging points make a lot of sense because teachers can then charge their vehicles there, or parents, when they're coming along in the afternoon for sports day, can then charge their vehicles there, and that improves the economics because we're then selling more of the electricity to the school rather than the grid at a very low price. So that's one. Batteries are hard. We're watching batteries closely. We've done a couple of trials in other countries, not the UK and not part of the CBS, but in sort of the other sort of work we do. The main challenge is that if you think about why solar is so good on the school in the first place, i.e. they consume electricity during the day, that also means it's actually quite tricky for a battery. In a residential setting, you're not at home during the day, so you charge your battery up during the day and then you use it at night. In a school, you're actually using it during the day, so you can't really charge your battery, and then at night you don't really need very much. So when you model a battery in a school environment, it's hard to get the economics to work. It's hard to get enough usage out of the battery to cover the capital cost of the battery. We've been looking at possibly using the battery to do ancillary services like supporting the grid, but the revenue models attached to that, you can't guarantee it for more than a couple of years. But we believe that as battery prices continue to come down and the value of the electricity we export to the grid drops further, at the moment we're getting about 7p, but as that drops below 3.5p, the economics of batteries might become more attractive. So we've actually set ourselves a goal of testing a battery in one of the schools that we look after by the end of this year to learn from it and see whether we could roll it out to other schools too.
Thank you to both Agata and Tim for feeding back on Robert's answers. And Tim, thanks for your comments. I mean, you're a fantastic impact investor because you're acknowledging the environmental and educational benefits. You're asking about the financial sustainability. You appear to be very happy with the answers. And you mentioned it's great for people like you who live in a listed building, that are not allowed to install our own solar panels. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, right.
I want to turn to Wendy, who and perhaps you three could help Wendy out because she is very involved at a local primary where her son has been a pupil, and she thinks she can persuade the head to become involved in solar for schools. So what should she do next?
So I was about to reply to that. So if you go to the Solar for Schools website, solarforschools.co.uk, you can register and we can then do an initial analysis on the school, and then we can help you work through the process. But this is where Anne comes in. So maybe Anne can sort of give you a few insights into the journey you will be taking with our helping hand.
So hi Wendy. Yes. So the way schools tend to come on board is they, as Robert was saying, they arrive on our website and they'll register an interest. And then what we will do is we will come back to the school and ask them, for details about how much electricity they use, what they're currently paying for their electricity. The team take Google Maps and look at the rooftops and get an idea of what sort of size could work for you, and the conversation starts between yourselves and the school about what they want to achieve, what they want to get out from having the panels, and we go through the whole of the stakeholder journey. So it's involving both the governors, the senior leadership team, and to some extent the pupils. Some schools really want the pupils involved at an early stage. Some hold back and have the pupils involved at a later stage. And of course, we have to, depending on the governance of your school, we then have to look at the, who owns the building, do we have permission to do so, etc., etc. But it's a journey that we go on with those schools, and it's one that informs you along that process. But the first step is really, if you could register on our site, that would be lovely. Or you can just email one of us, just using our first name and then solarforschools.co.uk. So it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, good luck with that, Wendy. We'd love to hear about that. Wendy, you also ask, how do I become an investor? This is a great question. I would refer you to the essex.org website, and you will find that Solar for Schools is the first investment opportunity which is currently listed. It came up yesterday. The instructions are fairly self-explanatory. If you confront any issues as you go through this process, don't hesitate to contact us. And then Michael has a really interesting question. Have you worked with many local authorities to top up the investment in local schools? Could I ask my council to invest in this scheme?
Yes, we have. So Michael, we've done so through with one council. We work hand in glove with them through their public sector decarbonisation scheme. So they're able to get a certain amount of money through Salix, and then we help top up, do the 50-50% contribution. So the council will do the 50% on the heat pumps, and we'll do the 50% on the solar. And that ensures that schools can take forward both an investment in heat pumps, but also an investment in solar. So we work with councils in that way. It's rare that a single council will find a pot of money, but there are combined authorities. And we do at the moment, we're very fortunate in that we've got the Tees Valley Combined Authority, who have what they call an enabling fund of money, a pot of money, which works in the same way as the National Grid money, providing, top up funds for schools. And they are amazing. They make such a difference. So if you've got a council that who might be prepared to invest some of their money into something like that as a grant, then it makes a huge difference for the schools that are going forward in that area.
Just going on to another financial question from Caroline, correctly points out that if ISAs are not covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, do you have some checks in place? I referred earlier on to the due diligence procedure that FX applies to all potential investees, and that applies equally to Solar for Schools. So this is a process that goes on for many, many weeks. We delve into and challenge many financial aspects relating to each investee. That's what I would say. Is there anything else that you would mention, Robert or Anne?
I guess I might add that. So if you think of Solar for Schools, when we talk about Solar for Schools, there's sort of two parts to it. There's the Solar for Schools CBS, which raises the money, owns the assets, collects the income from the schools, is owned by the schools. It's a sort of not-for-profit entity where you're investing in, and that is sort of simple and transparent as possible to keep it safe as possible. All the risky bits are done by another organization called Solar Options for Schools. So we do all the running around, looking at the schools, trying to see if the school works, doing the structural surveys, doing the development work, and then discovering that actually that school's not going to work because the roof's too weak. And we spent £3,000 or £4,000 trying to work out whether that project is going to work, and it doesn't. But that happens separately to the CBS. So the CBS we've tried to sort of separate the risks. So all the risky stuff takes place in options, and we raise money into that too. We've got some shareholders in that. This is not the raise they're talking to. That's highly risky. Any person who put money into that, a lot of my friends and relatives put money in that to support the business. I said, look, you can't put a penny more in there than you're prepared to lose, and buy me a drink. Yeah, that's options. Yeah, that's the risky bit. Solar for Schools CBS, on the other hand, is if you put money in there and I lose it, I deserve to get kicked very hard where it hurts. Yeah, that shouldn't go wrong. That doesn't mean it won't or can't go wrong. Yeah, the sun could stop shining That's going to be a bigger problem for all of us. Yeah. The schools could all refuse to pay their bills. That would be a problem. Yeah. Things could go wrong, but we've tried incredibly hard to make that bit as safe as possible, because unless we make that bit safe, we can't raise enough money to help lots and lots of schools. And so we've done what we can, but that's no guarantee that it won't work. Something could go wrong. I mean, climate change means that there's more cloud cover. We might just get less sun on these systems, and now they will struggle to then generate enough income. That I can't avoid. But on the other hand, leaving our money in the bank, yes, it's guaranteed. But if the climate around us collapses, that's not going to help us either. So it's kind of a balance. And what I'd like to think is we've made it as safe as possible to do something positive for the environment. Yes, or you can just keep it 100% safe in your bank and hope that the environment looks after itself. And that's a decision you each have to make.
Tim again asked a very interesting financial question. And it's is there any way to get the interest to compound until the end of the bond? So what he's saying is that each year interest is paid, but that is then cash, which doesn't earn a return. I guess in stock market terms, there's this expression, dividends reinvested. Michael, I'm afraid for specific bonds, that is not the case.
So that's an interesting question. So we do have a reinvestment option. At the moment, the minimum amount for a new bond is 250. So that option only kicks in if your interest payment is at least enough to create another minimum size bond. So there is a mechanism to do that. Now, within the ISA wallet, if we just repay, what happens is the money flows back to ethics and it goes into your ISA wallet in ethics, where you can then reinvest it in either the Solar for School CPS or any other ISA product on the ethics platform without it using up your annual tax-free ISA allowance. So you can manually reinvest it. And we're working on being able to sort of semi-automatically reinvest it. But thanks for the feedback. It will probably push that up my list of priorities as a result of that comment. Thank you.
Thanks for much more impressive and comprehensive answer to that question, Robert. Michael is on again. Could you do a batch of school surveys in an area to spread out the risk for solar for schools, or is it an ad hoc process? And then does academization throw a spanner in the works if working with a local authority?
Oof, lots of questions. And do you want to tackle those?
Okay, no, thank you, Robert. Right, so there are certain economies of scale. Yes, if you have a lot of schools in a particular area, it can help reduce some of the capital cost for the development work. If you have a structural engineer, though, come in, it tends to be on an ad hoc basis, on an ad hoc process. So there are some advantages of having them grouped. It does to a certain extent make it easier. Does academization throw a spanner in the works? It could do, is the answer. If a council is putting money into a project, they will be rather reluctant to do so if that school then becomes an academy. However, councils are the superior landlords of all academies. And therefore, if a school becomes an academy, it's not a problem, is the answer. So if they're putting money in, yes, it can. But if they're not putting any money in, then there really isn't a problem there. So I hope that helps.
Academization was a massive problem about 3 or 4 years ago because everyone was so distracted with it that they had no time to think about anything else. At the moment, it's nearly helping a little bit because schools that we've done that have become part of an academy, there's sort of now a doorway into that academy, and the academy is gradually giving us or wants us to do more and more of the other schools. So it's sort of you win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
Helpful suggestion here. Could you put up the website link for schools to express an interest, please?
I'll repost it, yeah.
I just had a a broader question. Obviously, the last few weeks has seen a significant change in the political background. To what extent does that, or could that, alter the landscape for community-owned clean energy over the next 5 years? How long have you got?
Gosh, so I mean, I was talking to the Department for Education today, just asking them, you know, what changes they could see coming. And no one really knows yet, to be entirely honest. Real crystal ball gazing. I mean, theoretically, it potentially the next 5 years could see some changes coming about, but working with the academies means that the Department for Education have a lot of delegated authorities. Everything needs to be put into place at the moment. So I think it's sort of fairly early days to be sort of looking and thinking, you know, are the changes that we're seeing really going to bring us, you know, huge benefits? But I think as a society, we need to do something. And as a society, it's an apolitical decision, isn't it, to look at living more sustainably?
Good. So we're reaching the end of our session. We've had lots of questions about lots of different things. So thank you very much for all those questions and indeed the feedback to the answers that have been provided. It just leaves me to, well, ask three of you, are there any parting messages?
No, I was just looking at Caroline's comment. Thank you for that. And I think if anyone had any more finance related questions, do please ask me. I'll just drop my email in the chat now.
So for me, I would just say that the community is made up of the schools and the students, but it's equally made up of the bondholders. And for us, it's really important to us that we have the crowdfunding for the community, and it's lovely that we have really amazing bondholders, and the comments that we get from our bondholders really support us through the work that we do. So thank you to all those who do invest.
Just before we say goodbye, there's just one thing. What we are trying to do at FX is foster more engagement with our investors, and to the extent that there are financial issues that you would like to discuss with the investment team, we are very open to that, and all our contact details are on the website. But look, thank you, Danielle, Robert, Anne, for your participation. As I mentioned earlier on, the offer is open. It's on the fx.org website. It's off to a good start. And it's also available, as discussed, for an IF ISA. So thanks to all three of you for your time, and thanks to all our participants for their active engagement and their questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.